Hello, this is Pete Peranio, founder and president of Empirepreneur, and this module is your high ticket sales system phase 2. So this is the introductory session and consultation phase. So we've gone over the phone presentation and walk-in system in terms of phase 1 to secure this consultation, and now we're going over the actual consultation and session system itself. So you're going to learn how to sell high ticket programs, build recurring revenue, and get clients even better results. We're going to talk about how this process, if you follow it, you can convert 75% of the prospects or higher. Okay, 75% is really kind of our red line. We use that as the benchmark. If we see somebody that's at 75% or higher, they're in good shape, they're following the system, things are going well. If somebody dips below that, and that typically means we need to retrain them, continue to work on it until we get them above that 75% mark. Okay, and this is our experience working with clients today, as well as my prior experience of 15 years, multiple states, multiple studios, with multiple managers. So a lot of kind of data here that shows that we can definitely convert at that rate if we're following all systems correctly. And frankly, we've refined and improved this over the years and with clients today. So you can be at a much higher rate than that as well. We're going to talk about how to sell high ticket programs by selling transformation, not sessions, not price. It's all about the transformation and solving the problem for the client. We're going to talk about how to build recurring revenue without eliminating the opportunity to sell high ticket programs. Okay, so there's really a big trend for 10 years, the last 10 years or even longer, whereas everything was almost anti packages or high ticket sales. Everything's about recurring revenue, only sell month to month, and various reasons for that. I never really understood it because I really never saw why you couldn't build recurring revenue as well as have high ticket programs. Okay, in our pricing module, we obviously talk about that quite a bit on how you can do that. Now here in phase 2, we're talking just about the finer points on how do we communicate that, how do we steer clients in those directions, how do we deal with the different price sheets that we now have established, and how do we present that to the client to ultimately get them the program they need, and obviously for us to generate the revenues that we're looking for. We're also going to talk about how you don't have to have 18 ways to address objections, if you know how to take them off the table in the first place. Okay, and that's such old school tactics of addressing objections, this, that, whatever. If you know how to take them off the table in the first place, okay, meaning that they're no longer available to the client because you've agreed to certain things beforehand, then you don't have to address as many objections. So you'll see what I'm talking about there and how this is a very powerful technique so you can eliminate at least half, if not the majority of objections most people have. We're going to talk about how to increase the number of sessions a client trains per week as well, which is critical for them, again, getting the results that they want and for you to be able to deliver on your promise to them. So our purpose here is to turn prospects into high-paying clients who are more committed, train more often, and get better results through a consultative approach that's not salesy at all. Okay, we're being professionals here. We're giving them our professional recommendation, doing it in the right way, and because we know how to attract the right people to our business, we know how to position ourselves differently. We know how to price our products and services appropriately with the right pricing strategy. We don't need to be salesy or use all kinds of marketing gimmicks or salesy tricks. This is not about. This is about really leading that client in the right direction and doing it in a way that, yes, it is influential and motivates them to take the next step, but there's definitely no tricks to it. So some key points. We want to make sure that we build rapport when we first meet with the prospect, okay? People buy from people they like and trust. It's as simple as that. If you think about any buying situations you've ever been in, you've never bought from somebody you don't like or trust, or very rarely, that's for sure. And especially if it's a major investment for you, okay, or a decent size investment. All right, a $20 item, no big deal. But if somebody's spending $1,000, they need to know they can like and trust somebody to make that investment. We utilize questions to maintain control of the consultation process and establish our credibility and build emotion at the same time. Okay, so just like we're talking about the phone presentation, we talk about establishing those questions. Some key points. First, we have to build rapport when first meeting prospects. People buy from people they like and trust. It's as simple as that. If you think about any purchase you've ever made, maybe not every purchase, but especially if you're making an investment, if you're investing thousands or you've made a significant purchase decision, it's going to be from somebody that you like and trust. If that trust isn't there, you're just not going to make that purchase. So that's a big key, is to be able to build that. If you follow the phone presentation system, the walk-in presentation system, you've established some of that that's helped you in that area. Now we need to take it to the next step and continue to build that like, trust, and expertise. We do that, and that goes a heck of a long way for us to complete the sale and sign up a client. We utilize questions to maintain control of the consultation process, establish our credibility, and build emotion. Okay, people buy with emotion first, then they justify that decision based on logic. Okay, so we have to establish emotional buying decisions, build that problem, establish emotion, and then everything else we present to them in this process will justify it with our logic as a whole. We must build the problem with our questions so we can later rescue them with our solution. Okay, if somebody doesn't realize they have a problem, or we haven't built that problem big enough for them to value what we present to them, then they're not going to buy. Okay, and they're not really going to value your solution. You can tell them all the great things that you can do for them in terms of your solutions and your benefits, but if they don't realize they have a problem, okay, or the problem's as big as it is, or it could get worse if they don't resolve that problem, then your solution doesn't matter. Okay, so we have to really build that problem, because then we can present the solution. Okay, and you're right there in itself, it's going to go a long way towards you getting the type of clients and the type of sale that you want. We must make our recommendation about what's required to make their transformation. Okay, it's never about money. Okay, it's never about money. It's never not about a certain number of sessions. It's always about what it's going to take for you to solve that problem, and we have to be able to tell that person exactly that. Okay, we got to say, hey Sally, based on the goals we've discussed today, your situation, the problems we've outlined, this is what it's going to take. I'm going to need to see you 3 or 4 times a week for X amount of time, etc., etc. So we'll look at that deeper in the scripting process. You can't let your own financial position or perceptions get in the way of selling what your clients need. Okay? If you don't make a recommendation with passion, confidence, and conviction, they won't buy from you. Okay? If you're authentic, honest, and passionate about it, and you're really engaged with them about that, all right, that's again going to build that like and trust, and they will buy from you. Okay? You can't let your financial position get in that way. All right? I used to tell some of my managers, for instance, the reality is some of the people, if we're attracting the right person and they're making, a minimum of $150,000 a year, $250,000 a year, you're talking about somebody that's a minimum of $12,000 a month or $24,000 a month that they're bringing in income. Okay, and you're asking them, maybe let's say on a high ticket program, to buy a $6,000 program that could last them for 5 to 6 months out of the year. Okay, so in the math equation, compared to what numbers they're used to, that's not a very big number. Okay, they're living in a $500,000, $1 million home. You're talking about, a $5,000 mortgage for the month, and then that $1,200 Mercedes they have, and then you can add it all up. Okay, so we're talking about a small fraction actually of the person that we're trying to attract, their overall budget. Okay, so we have to understand their numbers are different than maybe what your numbers are potentially. Okay, another example is, I can remember when I first started my first studio. I remember when $2,000 a month for payroll just seemed like a lot. Wow, and then, well, guess what? In later years, it was $30,000 every 2 weeks, right? So, as your numbers go. I've heard the expression before, and other entrepreneurs say, sometimes it's just adding zeros, and it's very true. You become a little more immune or numb to those numbers as your numbers increase. So you got to understand where they're coming from. It's really not as big a number as maybe you potentially make it out to be. So very important concept to understand and to have a mindset around it. If you don't think it's a big deal, they won't make it a big deal as long as they see the value in what you're providing to them. So there's 8 steps really in this process to getting a new high quality long-term client. Okay, the first step, building rapport, and then we're going to take them on a facility tour. Okay, so let them see the facility. It could be a short, brief tour, but we still want to be able to explain, why we're set up the way they are, all the little details. Again, this is somewhat of the intellectual, logical part. So the first part of the introductory session and consultation, the introductory session itself, is much more about the logical components of the decision-making process, the purchase decision-making process they have to go through. People are going to have questions wandering around in their head. This is really where we want to handle all the intellectual stuff, the questions about your facility, how things work, hours, operations, whatever it is, all that intellectual stuff. Because then when we get to the consultation, which is the back half of this process, we want it to be all about building that problem, and we want it to be about emotion, which is the primary driver in the decision-making process. Okay, so if you kind of fundamentally understand this, is that you are covering a lot of information, a lot of details in the introductory session piece of this, so you don't have those questions come up later in the consultation. In the consultation, we want to control that conversation, and we want to ask the right questions to build their problem and elicit that emotion that becomes a motivator for somebody to want to commit to making a change in their life. Okay, so the introductory session then is that step 2 or assessment. Okay, depending on sometimes your type of business model. So if you're a sports performance facility, an assessment process might be better for you. Maybe you specialize in corrective exercise or other types of programs, and assessment might be better for you. So again, depending on what your positioning strategy, if you're a typical personal training studio, then you want to actually have them sample the service, your personal training session itself. Okay, then we would move into the consultation piece, where we break this down into a couple steps, where first we're setting up our upfront agreement at the beginning of the consultation with them. We're going to build pain and then build the problem. We're going to identify their needs based on that pain and problem. Then we're going to rescue them and present to them a solution for how we can solve that problem. Okay, then we're going to get a commitment for them to make a change. Okay, for them to make a change in their life based on the problem they've got, the solution we have for them, and then we're going to make our recommendation based on all of that. Okay, so we're going to be breaking down each one of these. We're going to be looking at the systems action plan we have for these different steps. So there's a lot of details in the systems actions plan, so we're not going to cover every little bit. We're going to be pretty thorough here, but again, there's tons of information and step-by-step benchmarks in there, so you'll want to deep dive into those even more than what we go over here today. But we're going to break down each one of these, looking at the systems action steps and then the associated resources that we have. So we have different scripts for the consultation, as well as other processes that aid in this 8-step process. So first, building that rapport in our facility tour. Okay, so our goal here again is to build like and trust. Okay, so people buy from people they like and trust. We want to tour the facility and talk to them a little bit about our philosophy as a whole. So this is coming from, again, in your other module, building your positioning strategy. You'll continue to refine what that message is, what makes you, differentiates you, makes you better than the competition, and why you're able to solve the problem. So we kind of mix that into our facility tour as we're going through, but also, again, just explaining some just logistics. Like I said, we want to get a lot of logical stuff out of the way in this process. Okay, you want to make sure you present yourself professionally. Okay, you gotta, handshake, eye contact's important. I think it's a lost art anymore. Just a good old handshake with somebody. I think that goes a long way. Offering a handshake with somebody, because it's frankly so rare today that you get people, to offer a handshake in a setting like this. Okay, be dressed professionally. This is like one of my biggest pet peeves. I mean, I understand, yes, we're in a fitness setting, and we need to be in clothing that we can move and exercise in, but there's still ways to do that. There's ways to still look sharp and look professional with a logoed shirt, or even if it's a collared shirt, but it's more of dry fit oriented, athletic. There's tons of different options there. Definitely take pride in that. Make sure it's uniform with your staff. And that goes a long ways. If you're asking somebody to make the high ticket investment with you, again, they have to like and trust you. You have to be credible. And if you're just wearing a plain old t-shirt, you don't look all put together, your staff doesn't match, you don't know the staff from a client in terms of working out, well, then it doesn't go very far. So I can't emphasize this enough. I see it way too often. I could tell you it's kind of a funny story, but I remember back when I started in big box gym. I mean, I had a waiting list of people, and one of the reasons was technique wise, I was doing some things differently at that time when functional training was a little more rare, that kind of stuff. So people were attracted to that, but also I dressed the part, and people would comment on that all the time. I just looked more professional, put together than other folks. So again, it's perception. Whether you like it or not is reality. Okay, the other thing is turn on the switch. I always talk about turn on the switch, kind of visualizing, for instance, you flip that light switch on, go in the room, lights go on, right? This is kind of, to me, was always that mental flip on the switch, is that energy's got to come up, right? You got to be energized, you got to be passionate about what you're doing. Maybe it's been a long day, maybe had some things go wrong in the day, whatever it is. Again, as the owner, sometimes we're juggling multiple things, or the manager. And so, when it comes time, though, we have to be able to go into this process, be mentally focused, and turn that energy on, turn that juice up a notch. Because again, this can be an opportunity for $5,000-$6,000 sale. So this isn't, we're not selling a $29 widget here. We need to be engaged and ready to go. Okay, find common ground early, right? So sometimes you can probe this a little bit in the phone presentation or the walkthrough, but try to find some common ground, things that you could chit chat a little bit about through the process, or joke about, or try to get, again, you try to get them to loosen up. So try to find some things that are some common ground. Maybe it's the college they went to, or who knows. I mean, you're always looking for something, but try to find some common ground early. Get them talking and help them feel comfortable. Okay, you gotta remember, a lot of times when people, a personal trainer can be intimidating to somebody that's out of shape. The idea of, frankly, just starting to get engaged in an exercise program, if you're really out of shape, can be highly intimidating. Not sure if I can do it. Oh my God, that's a lot of people that don't necessarily enjoy exercise. There's a lot of factors there that the more you can get them comfortable, the more they can picture themselves actually doing this and enjoying it. Okay, so build this rapport on your studio tour as you go through that. So let's take a look at kind of sample system. So again, I say sample system because the system we provide you is very thorough, but of course, especially this one, facility tour, you got to adapt it to your facility. You got to adapt it to your business model. But this should give you a running start, because for me, always much easier to create something if I had a sample or something similar to what I'm trying to produce. So let's look at a sample system and kind of a layout that you'd think. Again, the reason we want to have a system like this is not only for us to be able to deliver it, but eventually, whether it's a manager or other people, as you start to grow and scale, we want to be able to delegate these processes out so other people can do consultations as well, and you don't have to be the person potentially at the studio 24/7. So there's a reason it's not just short term for us, it's long term. Maybe you have a goal of multiple locations, or just even freeing yourself up more, right? Where you can go on vacation and you don't have to worry about not being able to make any sales. So we want to set these systems up so we can be repeatable ourselves, and we can help coach you through the best ways. And this way you can remember what we tell you is the best guidance. You can put it down to a system, but again, it makes it so that you can be duplicatable as well. All right, so let's take a look at the first step. Okay, so we got our introductory session process system here. Again, you can fully edit this, but as usual, we always start, where is this system located? And in our academies, we help people, separate their systems more, and there's a lot more into the, creating your full-fledged operations procedure. And so this is kind of what we talk about growing your business, and then this would go into your lead conversion. So it's kind of part of how do we, organize our systems for the long haul. So our result statement is really what we're looking to produce out of this. So the effective use of this system will provide all participant positions with a comprehensive approach to handling introductory sessions with all prospective clients. All right, we always want to have some benefits. So the reason why behind the system, effective use of this will result in higher introductory session conversion rates and increased sales. This will ultimately contribute to high client and session numbers and a highly profitable studio. We quantify the effectiveness of this with our key strategic indicators of our conversion rates, average ticket sale, and overall sales. Okay. Then you can designate who's accountable for this position and who else participates, in this process as well. Okay. So early benchmarks though, as we talked about, facility tour aspect of things. So just our initial greeting with the prospect up front. Then we establish what we call an upfront contract with that prospect right when they walk in the door. So before the beginning of the facility tour, we explain to the prospect what it takes during their session, okay, or what will take place during their session, okay. So we want them to, know what that process is going to look like, eliminate the fear or the unknown. And so if people just kind of know step by step what they're going to go through, they're much more eased through the entire process. I know that sounds very basic, but it's just very true. So that's really all this upfront contract is really all about. We just want to, make note to them that, it's important to fully inform the prospect, what will happen prior to the tour or warm up to ease their anxiety, build rapport and trust, okay, with the prospect prior to working with them. Okay, it's critical to always utilize the future tense when describing procedures or instructions to the prospect, okay, to increase the likelihood of a close rate. Right, we want to assume that they're already a client. So I always say, treat them as if they're a client already. So we don't want to say, hey, if you decide to go with us or whatever, John, this is what would happen next time. No, what we're going to do instead, as we take them through this tour, explaining different things or the introductory session, we're going to say, John, next time you come in, here's what's going to happen. Okay, this, and this, or in the future, John, here's what we're going to do. Or 3 months down the road from now, John, you'll experience this. Okay, so really, that's really very important to have. Sometimes very underappreciated, or in a good sales process, is to really treat them as if they're already clients. We're not talking about if they do or don't. The way I look at it is if they committed to the session, they're in my facility, they're here, they're a client, and we're going to be moving forward on their goals. Okay, so just some basic scripting here, example that you can utilize. I don't believe you've been to the facility, so okay, so let's start there. Then I'll take a few minutes to give you a facility tour. Then I'll take you through a moderate 5-minute warm-up on our cardiovascular equipment, and then following that warm-up, we'll complete our introductory resistance training session. It'll take up to about 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, the resistance training session will be followed up by the consultation, where we'll sit down and talk about all the details about your goals, and then what I'll do is recommend a couple programs to you based on what I see today. Okay, John? So, and then I start to take them on the tour. So again, this could be modified. I mean, in this example here, starting somebody on a 5-minute warm-up cardiovascularly, sometimes I recommend that, even though you might do a dynamic warm-up or other types of mobility stuff before the actual resistance training. Sometimes having that 5-minute just cardiovascular warm-up, walking on a treadmill, those sort of things actually gives you an opportunity to, again, further build rapport, have a conversation with them before you actually get into the exercise part. Okay, so something to think about there. Not 100% necessary. There's other ways to do it, but I just did want to kind of mention that in terms of, how do I start them in terms of a warm-up. Obviously, every trainer's got their own philosophy on how they should do different things. I just wanted to point out there, it's not that we're not doing mobility or flexibility or dynamic warm-ups or things like that. It's just that we're doing actually this right beforehand. Also this, we train people beforehand to do this. A lot of times too, that can help you actually with future clients, coming in prior to their session time so they're not late, and some other important factors we usually talk about in operations. Then we take them on a tour. Okay, and we use the walkthrough system for this. So you should have been in phase 1 sales process, should have been updating the walkthrough process to fit your facility. Again, the walkthrough process is very similar to the phone presentation, but we modify it to explain the benefits or details of our facility in addition to some other factors. Okay. Now, obviously, the one thing is we wouldn't be, deep probing into their goals like our walk-in system, because we already did that on the phone. We're obviously going to do it later in the consultation. So that is and here obviously not going to recommend the consultation because you're there, but the main structure in terms of how do we explain the benefits and how our facility is laid out, what's important about it, and why you have certain equipment or not certain equipment, and certain things like I said we point out in the walkthrough system. You'd want to explain those as you're touring them. If you have unique equipment, especially, right? So there's some clients, so we definitely have proprietary equipment or things of that nature, and so that's where some of that, again, logical, intellectual conversation can take place. Okay, and then here, just again, what might take place if you do that warm-up beforehand, before going into actual session and doing dynamic warm-ups. Like I said, I actually prefer this for this because I can build a little bit of rapport and talk them through different things. So we just kind of explain, you might pick a different piece of cardiovascular equipment if you have it. If you don't, then obviously you do your dynamic warm-up and still be building rapport during that process. So that's all really this is. I'm not going to dive deep into the details on this, but we're just, again, starting to build, not just rapport, but starting to build our expertise. And the other thing with this too is, again, I frame it as if they're already a client, and so when I'm showing them this warm-up, I'm actually talking to them about next time they come in, what our expectation is for this warm-up, why we do it before the session. We explain that, in this particular example, that, we want you to come in 5 to 10 minutes early to take this, this warm-up portion before your session, and then we'll be working with you on your flexibility and more dynamic mobility type stuff, etc. So again, there is some expert positioning here, but continuing that opportunity to just build some initial rapport with them. So just some example scripts for that. Again, this is something you want to modify your situation. Through your coaching, we can make recommendations based on your business model if you want to modify that at all for your business. Then we transition from the cardiovascular to more of your resistance training portion of things, and transition them from there. Some just example benchmarks on that. The opening of the resistance training session. So we want to basically, in this case, example is providing a very high-end service, so offering them towel and water, and doing it in a way that for this business, the positioning we're trying to emphasize here is very kind of Ritz-Carlton, if you will. So that's just this particular case. So offering them these sort of things, again, creating the brand and perception. So thinking about the little things and the experience on what you want clients to experience as well can be very important, and that's why we have that within the system here. Okay, and then just really taking them through the beginning, and again, a lot of this is just sample explanations and scripting in terms of explaining the workout. What can they expect in the workout? So while they're going through the mobility with flexibility exercises, explaining to them right before the workout what they can expect to ease some of that anxiety. But again, the more they understand what they're going to do, the less nervous they'll be. And also, again, you explaining these things is you educating and demonstrating your expertise. So you'll see how we just talk about sets, reps, supersetting. So these are just for the general person. These are things that we're educating them, explaining things so they can see our expertise and understand that they're going to get in good instruction and guidance from us. We're not going to just throw them through exercises in a workout. We want to be thorough, and by being thorough, they understand that they're going to be educated and taught, why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, so that's really just, what is your opening to your session like? That's what you want to have that. You want to understand what you're trying to explain, in that area. Okay. And then instructing the session itself. We have a separate or resource that you can look at that's another example that you can modify for the session. And the reason we have this, session key points, again, as we train other people in our business to be able to do this process, some people are better than others in terms of going through an exercise and building the problem while they're taking somebody through the exercise. So for instance, somebody's doing, a row exercise or something and their posture's bad, being able to explain to them why is that, weak upper back, tight pectorals, those sort of things. Some people are just frankly better than that than others, and being able to explain those things. So as we're, training others to do this, we want to make sure that they have the ability in this session too. We're not only proving our expertise in this session, but we're also starting to build that problem. We want them to see the problems they have physically, through the fitness session itself in terms of what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, because you're building that problem as well. Okay, and then we have the close of the training session. This is really a critical step. So a lot of these other ones you can modify, and we can give you recommendations there to fit your business model. But this piece right here and this scripting itself is very important. What we're covering is making our recommendation in terms of workouts per week, okay, 3 to 4 times per week. Then we also talk about, how our workouts are structured, how often their workouts change, okay. But this section is really important because this is where we make our initial logical explanation on why they should come in 3 or 4 times a week, okay. Because then this way, when we get to our consultation, we make that recommendation of 3 or 4 times a week. We've already told them here that most of our clients come in 3 or 4 times a week. 3 is very good. 4 is really kind of that gold standard, if you will. It's for people that want quicker results. Typically, we'll see us 4 times a week, but Jan, 3 times a week is good as well. And in fact, what I'm going to do later in our consultation, based on your goals, your situation, I'll recommend 2 programs, one at 3 times a week and one at 4 times a week, and you can select what you think will be the best case for you. Okay, so again, we explain this up front, the logical piece, because then later on when I present the program to them at 3 or 4 times a week, it's just more of an either or. Which one do they want to select? Okay, so definitely pay attention to this section when you dive in and read that, and some of that scripting can be it's time tested in terms of kind of how to explain that. The other thing we are doing here is talking about, again, how your workouts are structured. Okay, so yours could be structured different, but like in this example, we do split routines, splitting up muscle groups in different days for one, for physiological reasons. This way we can train more certain muscle groups more intensely on certain days. You can get longer recovery periods, right? You can explain maybe reasons for that, and then psychologically, Jan, it also makes it so that every workout you come in here is new, is different. It's not the same workout every single time. Okay, again, this might seem like common sense to us, like of course we're going to do it that way, but it isn't to the average Joe. You might take them through that introductory session and consultation, and they might think, well, this is what the workout's going to always be like. Now, that could be a bad thing. In their mind could be like, man, I don't know if I want to do this every time I came in, or if I did this 3 days a week, would I get bored? So I'm actually kind of addressing potential objections in their mind about our service, and I want them to fully understand how it works. Okay, so hopefully you see that. And also the same thing in terms of how often the programs change. Programs change every 4 weeks, maybe it's 6 weeks for you, whatever that time frame is for physiological and psychological reasons. So the same thing, we explain those things. So you got to really try to anticipate, right? Get in the mind of the prospect. What are some objections they might have about, or perceptions that could be misperceptions about your program? And so that's kind of what we're doing there, is addressing some of those things so they really understand how their program will work on that front. And then also from a frequency standpoint, really establishing that up front. So very important aspect of that, and you'll just see kind of some example scripting of how that could be explained. All right, then after that, shifting to the consultation, which again we're going to get into next a little bit more on that. So this is just what the flow of that introductory session and consultation will look like. So a good sample system for how you would establish those benchmarks. Let's take a look just real quickly too at the introductory session key points system. So again, this is kind of the details of how you might actually conduct that session. Again, that's going to be very different for everybody depending on your philosophies, etc. The one I'm going to show you is pretty kind of plain Jane, if you will, a little bit in terms of what would fit kind of the general personal trainer working with kind of that general fitness client as a whole. Okay, so here's our other resource, the introductory session, key points. So again, this is just for two purposes. If you have no idea how you would want to conduct this session, this might help you. Again, this is more formatted for your general fitness personal training clients. If you're a sports performance facility or other specialty, then obviously this would change because you really have to emphasize those aspects that you want somebody to sample for your unique service or differentiation. But this will fit most general personal training guidelines, and then other than that, you would just adjust to your philosophies. Really what we want you to get the point of here is have a pre-plan for what that introductory session would look like to fit most people, because you don't know necessarily what you're getting in until you're actually with them. I mean, you're going to get a general idea in the phone presentation, but you're not going to 100% know until somebody comes in. And it's just a preliminary workout, really. That's why we call it introductory session too, by the way, is we want people to have that perception that it's introductory. So it's not necessarily a full session like it would perfectly be like. And again, we obviously explain that on the phone presentation. So just here, what would be maybe some basic stretching guidelines, key points for each stretch. So again, why do we have all these details? This is for if I delegate this out eventually. So if I'm the owner manager and I get other people involved, in this process, in this system, we want to cover our bases so that we can convert at a high amount. Don't ever assume that people would explain, certain exercises or be able to build the problem in certain exercises as well as you do. So we want to take away that opportunity for error to help train them up. And then also it's a guideline makes you more efficient when you're training. When you have this established ahead of time, when it comes time to train some people up and you have these systems in place, frankly, it's easier, right? They have a resource to read ahead of time. You have some key guidelines to go over, and that just ends up being good delegation, right? Instead of just kind of brain dumping on them and hope they catch some key points. So it just makes our training better as well. So just, in this case, what would be the dynamic warm-up or stretching portion? What would be some things that you're looking for? And like what you're going to see in here is, you're going to explain what the muscle groups are, but you're always looking for opportunities. Like here, the tightness in the hamstring is probably one of the major contributors, that we see in terms of people needing flexibility improvements. They often lead to low back pain, etc. So building problems that they might have, or maybe you already know of a problem you talked about on the phone, and you can identify why that is because they have certain tightness or weakness in certain areas. So that's really what this is about, is having that ability to thoroughly explain the exercises, but also help build the problem along the way. And then just general guidelines. Typically this is more for that general fitness person. You might be doing 2 sets of 15 reps for, all exercises except for maybe a higher intensity one like a back lunge. You might reduce those rep ranges. Typical workout, so some assisted squats and shoulder press, assisted back lunge, standing, thera, reverse fly. So here's just some example workout. Supersetting those exercises from assisted squat to a back or to a shoulder press, then supersetting a lunge with a reverse fly, a chest press with a lat pull down, doing a little bit of core. Potential alternative exercises, right? If somebody has, rotator cuff issues or knee pain, these might be some alternatives. So as you can see, it's at a 2-set routine, supersetting, just basically 3 or 4 groups. You're getting through this session in 45 minutes, maybe an hour if, somebody's a little bit slower moving, you got more explanations. Again, I wouldn't try to rush through this. I mean, you want to prove your expertise. You want to build the problem here as well in this portion of it. And at the end of the day, they're test driving the car, right? So you want them to be impressed with the car, value you at a higher level. This is the opportunity to get them to value your expertise even more so than maybe they thought they would before they came in. Okay, the key points, for these, again, just that's what this is all about, is just maybe certain things people would miss in terms of key points within each exercise to help build that expertise. So that's all this is. What would be some key points with the shoulder press, back lunge, and reverse fly? Again, you can completely modify this, change this. Point is to have a pre-plan for this, an approach you'd want to have, but also make this so you can be duplicatable in the future, and whoever else takes this over can do it in a way that you want, right? As the owner or manager, how do I want this session conducted, okay? And how do I want it done well? How do I want them to build that problem? We need that system to be repeatable, okay? We can't just have somebody ad hoc that session and hope the consultation is just as good. Now we're going to have this thing dialed in so we can do a bang up job there, because I tell you what, if we do a bang up job here, we're on our way, okay? And the consultation can be much easier to win, to have them become a client if we do a bang up job in this section. Okay, so we've covered the initial greeting with the new prospective client, facility tour, the session itself. So you've now at this point wowed them with your expertise, your service. You've really covered all the intellectual aspects of things, the logical brain elements, where we fully help them understand how your program works, how your sessions work, what they could expect to experience if they were to come on board with your program. Okay, so again, very critical step there. I know there's a lot of information we kind of just quickly filtered through in that system, but you really want to spend some time on that portion of the system, reviewing those scripts. Again, there's a lot of customization that'll need to happen there based on your facility or your philosophy, but don't miss those key important elements in that system. And again, we'll bring those to your attention in your coaching calls as well to make sure that that's the case. But very critical part of what we've covered so far. It can go a long ways if you do a bang up job in there to making this consultation a lot easier. Now we got to shift though into really building that problem for them, right? Building the emotion, because people make decisions on emotion first, like I've said, and then they just justify with a logical piece of things, okay? So let's take a look at our consultation. We really have to break this down into 7 steps. So we're going to look at the scripts here in a second for this, but at first we're building an upfront agreement regarding the consultation. Then we're going to build pain. Okay, we're going to go through talking about their goals, but we're going to do it in a way that really builds pain, brings that emotion to the forefront in terms of the issues that they have. Then based on those questions about their goals, we're going to identify their needs, build the problem even further. Okay, so we're at least going to bring some clarity to it, because in the questions, we're basically asking questions about their goals so that it almost becomes, the pain becomes, and the problem becomes almost self-evident. Okay, but then what we want to do is kind of hold up that mirror in front of them, identify those needs, and build that pain and that problem in a very succinct statement that really just has impact, so they can really, wow, yeah, that is my problem. You clearly understand my situation. You clearly understand that I have an issue with this. Okay, so that's just part of being a professional right there, is be able to show them that you understand them, you understand their problem. Okay, by doing that and doing it in a very clear way, all right, there it builds even more trust that you're somebody that can solve it, right? Because how could you trust any professional if they can't reiterate to you what you see as the problem, okay? And as the client, that they agree that that's the problem that they have, okay? So once we've done that, then we rescue them, right? So we're really, we're kind of building that pain. That rescue is kind of the climax, if you will, of this consultation, because we've built that pain. Should be some good emotion kind of, running deep. They see they have a problem, because again, nobody will buy a solution until they see that they have a problem and that problem is big, okay? But the great news is you've done kind of all that, and some people will hesitate doing this. Some people will hesitate kind of building that pain because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or they're going to hold back a little bit. Again, we're going to do it in a professional way, but some people hold back there. Well, if it helps you at all, just know that you are going to rescue them eventually from that problem, and that's where we present our solution to them and how we can fix that problem. then we gain a commitment for them to make a change in their life, and then we simply present the solution, and we go through a closing process that is simple, just steers them as a leader, as a fitness professional, steers them in the right direction. There's no hard closes or any of that kind of stuff, okay? So let's take a look at the scripts themselves, and we'll talk in more in detail about these 7 different steps. Okay, so the consultation sales script. So this is something that you're going to have, always available in your office to quick reference. I can tell you, I know what I personally used to do is I always made sure I had at least 15 minutes, before a new prospective client was going to come in. So however I scheduled that in my books, I always had some time beforehand, so that I wasn't rushing around from one session to the other or out of sorts. I wanted to sit down and I wanted to kind of visualize that consultation and session going forward, meaning I wanted to go over the notes from the phone presentation or walkthrough that I did with them, where I preliminarily talked about their goals and their personal situation, so I got some initial feedback there. Are there any kind of curveballs that I got to deal with in terms of medical or health issues that I want to think through beforehand so that I conduct the session really well that's going to fit their needs and fit maybe some physical limitations or whatever that is. But then I wanted to go through this too. I wanted, even as many times as I had done one of these, I wanted to kind of go through this again, mentally kind of rehearse these scripts, especially the pain funnel questions, which I'll show you in a little bit as well, and just make sure I'm sharp. So you definitely want to do that. So let's look at, again, those 7 steps. So the first step in that consultation, you're literally, you're sitting down in an office. And by the way, that's what you want to do. You need to be in a quiet, uninterrupted place, okay, where that person's not going to be distracted. Okay, so ideally this is in an office space that you have, or somewhere, where if you don't have an office space, then you're going to have to find a space in your facility that you can designate to sit down for consultations. Okay, and there's various ways that you can do that, but it has to be uninterrupted space where they can maintain focus in there. They're not worried about people overhearing their conversation, because you want that client to be able to open up to you, be honest with you in this. Otherwise, you're just definitely not going to extract the kind of emotion that we're looking for in problem building in this consultation. So critical step. Okay, so in the upfront contract, some key points here, and they're even on the bottom here as a reminder. But what we're really trying to accomplish here is we're trying to set some expectations, up front, and sometimes too take away some apprehension about it being a hard sales pitch kind of thing. So again, we'll do a little even rapport building as we sit down before we actually get into this script. So you might offer them a bottle of water or towel or whatever, sit down and say, so what did you think, Sally? How was the workout? How'd it feel? I mean, it was just about right, harder than you think? So just a little bit of chit chat before you kind of break into this. Again, to kind of ease things so that, because sometimes people kind of anticipate, oh, I'm going into the kind of the closing room, so to speak, if I'm going into an office or something like that. So you just want to kind of get them at ease and relax after the workout a little bit. Just a little chit chat or whatever, and then you can break into it. Okay, and then it's like, okay, great. Well, John, in this consultation, I like to ask a lot of questions to better understand your goals and how we can better help you achieve them. Of course, that's if you don't mind me asking some questions. Oh no, great. Okay. Well, now our programs, John, they're not for everybody. So during this consultation, what I'd like to do is determine if we're a good fit for each other. And if I feel like I can help you, then what I'm going to do is recommend a couple programs to you. Now, you can obviously take my recommendation, or you can do any program you wish, or frankly, you can do nothing at all. But obviously, most people are here for our recommendations, okay? But the one thing, John, I do ask is that we are going to make a decision today, okay? Whether it's yes or no is fine, all right? And if you tell me yes, great, then we'll get you started achieving your goals. But if you tell me you want to think about it, that usually means one of two things, all right? It usually means either no, and you're just not comfortable telling me that, and don't worry about that, John. I'm a big boy, I can handle it. Or frankly, the biggest thing we see is that people, end up procrastinating, right? They just want to think about it, they end up procrastinating. So assuming, John, that we are a good fit, and I find that we're a good fit for each other, then what I'd like to do is come to decision today, okay? So we can really avoid those issues, because at the end of the day, as fitness professionals, that's what we help people do. We help hold them accountable. We help keep them on track. And so I'd hate to see you procrastinate. So is that reasonable? Okay, so So that's really, guys, we're trying to set that up front, set that expectation, okay? We want to ask permission to ask questions, okay? And this is important. You might have seen that there and might seem kind of maybe a little bit silly, but actually by asking permission to ask questions, you can bring down that defense. It's not like, so when I go into my pain funnel questions and I ask some pointed questions, somebody's not going to be offended. They can't be offended really, or I guess they could, but they're not. They're not going to be surprised by it, I guess, and they're going to be more open to it. So it is important to ask, is it okay if I ask you some questions, right? So that you can kind of dive into that, and that can unguard some people a little bit, all right? The other big key in here is what we kind of call a little bit of a mini takeaway here, where we say, hey, now our programs aren't right for everybody, right? And so during this consultation, I'd like to determine if we're a good fit for each other, okay? If I feel like we're a good fit, then what I'll do is recommend a couple programs, okay? So this is kind of that velvet rope mentality, right? That velvet rope into that club that everybody wants to get into, and they only pick so many people, right? Without being, overly arrogant about this, where you kind of up somebody on that front, you really want to just say it in a matter of fact, kind of real professional way, that we're not right for everybody. Right, and that's just the truth too. I mean, not everybody can commit to a personalized fitness program, or some people might just be better off in a gym scenario where they're not going to be as committed to working on their goals. Okay, and so that's really, it's a little bit of a mini takeaway. If you're not familiar with what a takeaway is, a takeaway means sometimes when you take away something from somebody, they actually want it even more. Okay, so it actually brings them closer to you. So by saying, our program are not right for everybody, and you're basically implying it, might not be right for you, and in a sense, I might not let you in the pearly gate, so to speak. That actually wants them to have it more. Okay, and so that's really what we're doing there. It can also take away some of that initial sales that they're expecting, right? They're expecting kind of the closing room or something, and here this guy's telling me I might not be a good fit for the program. Okay, so there's a lot of different components. Again, we'll talk even further about this in our coaching calls, but very valuable line right there in terms of that. And then you're going to tell them, I'm going to recommend a couple programs to you if I find you're a good fit. Okay, so this is important because later on too in the rescue, we actually start the rescue component saying, the good news is, John, I can help you. Okay, so if you do this right and you do it with the right tonality, you basically, I'm going to determine if we're a good fit and whether we can help you or not. Then all of a sudden you build all this problem going through the goals and the problem building, which we're going to get to in a little bit. We built that emotion, and kind of in the back of their mind, they're like, I don't know if this guy's going to accept me as a client, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, John, good news is we can definitely help you with that, right? And we tell them that. We'll get into that a little bit. Okay, but I can't tell you how much, I've done these consultations a million times. I've seen people just sit back in their chair and kind of then relax, right? Where it's also like, oh, whew, you can help me, right? And so, when you've done this right, it changes the whole game. I can't tell you how many people, clients, as well as, past managers I used to train this up on, how they said once they, first they're kind of doing it and they're kind of doing it okay, but then when they really got this right, how it changed the whole game in the consultation. It changed it from you trying to sell them on the program to that person actually, in a sense, trying to sell you on the fact that they'd be a good client for you to take on. Okay, so very important element there to get right. So then we also go on then to say we're going to recommend a couple of programs. And same thing here, we're saying, now you can take my recommendation, you can do any program you wish, or you can do nothing at all. Again, kind of the reverse sales mentality here. The other reason too, by the way, just to give you some background on this, the reason I added this is because I used to not have this in there, and what would happen was some people would come back and truly couldn't necessarily take my high-end ticket offer, but because, again, I presented myself in such a professional way and the way that I did it, the takeaway components of this, that people sometimes come back and they talk to me, one of my trainers, say, yeah, unfortunately I can't get started because I know Pete really recommended that I do this, and that would be just, what I really needed and had to do. But I just can't financially swing it. Okay. And so, what I discovered there was like, okay, well, I want them to take my recommendation seriously, which was obviously the case in the example I gave you. But I also wanted to let them know that, they can select another program if they need or other options, right? Now, again, we're very strong on our recommendations. We don't want to wave off of those things too easily. Most people do it way too easily. But of course, if somebody can't do 80 sessions, but they're willing to, buy a 6-month, stretch pay program, or even the 40 sessions, you're still talking about a couple of $1,000 sale there. And, then we have to just, in other ways, get their commitment. So let's say, for example, they have to under commit in a sense to a 3-month program, or the 40 sessions of 3 months. Then what we do is we talk to them about, okay, I'll, in a sense, I'll allow you to do that, but I'm going to need your commitment to, I want you to mentally think about the fact that you're probably going to need to renew this program, Jan, and I need you to think about this as a longer term commitment to just 3 months. I understand if this is, what fits your budget right now, but I want you to mentally prepare one way or another that, the end of the road's not in 6 months. Okay, is that fair, Jan? Okay, and so that's kind of the way that we can handle some of those shorter term commitments, but you don't want to give up on that too easy. All right. So again, this second paragraph here is this is where we're taking off future objections off the table. Okay. So, we start here by one thing I ask is that we make a decision today, and whether it's yes or no is perfectly fine. Okay. So we're not forcing a decision. This isn't a hard close right away. We're saying, hey, yes or no is fine. And if you say yes, great, we're going to get going on your goals. Okay, but if you tell me you want to think about it, so I'm taking away the I need to think about it. If you tell me you want to think about it, then that usually means one of two things. It means you don't want to tell me no, you're not comfortable telling me no, or you're going to procrastinate. Okay, and so assuming I feel like we're a good fit, so again, we're reinforcing that fit component, then I'd like us to come to a decision one way or another today. Okay, is that reasonable? And then boom. Okay, and now, a couple of things here. I know sometimes people, again, right tonality is everything. Some people are hesitant sometimes with some of not only the minute takeaway, but this component. But I'm telling you, if you do this right up front, it changes the game in the consultation from a guy that's trying to sell me to really kind of a reverse role of, especially if you did a bang-up job in the session, of I hope this guy takes me on as a client, and I hope this works out, and I hope this is a good fit. It changes that whole dynamic. Okay, a couple last comments on this too. Yeah, I have had people sometimes say when we're not a good fit for everybody, and if I feel like we're a good fit, I'll let you know, kind of thing. And some people I've had, especially guys, there's certain guys that have stronger walls in front of them, right? They build that wall up. I've had some people say, yeah, well, oh yeah, like you're gonna tell me I'm not, that I can't start the program or whatever. And I'll tell them poignantly, right? So I'll say, no, John, I mean, yeah, honestly, sometimes we don't accept everybody as a client. Because the bottom line is if, if somebody, for instance, isn't, able to commit to their goals, or, there's just other factors, they are not willing to make the right commitment to this program, then John, we don't accept them, because the reality is, if we don't do a good job for you because you're not committed to, following the program and taking our recommendations, then, it ends up hurting us, right? You go out into the public and say, the program didn't work for me or whatever else. And so our reputation is everything, John. So no, absolutely. I mean, if we just, we find we're not a good fit, we also feel like that, it's a service, to the person coming in and seeing our company. We don't want them to, spend money with us and it just wasn't a good fit and we couldn't deliver, on the promise to them for various reasons on why they weren't a fit for us. So no, absolutely. So, that's kind of your explanation, is that your reputation's on the line in terms of delivering and getting people results. And, if we find that there's, various factors that we don't think we'd be able to help them, that we want to be honest with them and let them know that. Okay. And so that's what we kind of reiterate to them. And I can tell you, it'll surprise some people sometimes, and can change the game. And especially, like I said, on people that are kind of being more hard-headed with you, you say that, and sometimes that will bring down the guard a little bit as well. So we can talk about that further as well, but very critical elements there. So again, just some good reminders for you of what I just talked about. so that you see those over the long haul as you're reading through this. Okay, then right after that, then we just move into, well, John, the first question I like to always ask is, why are you looking at personal training, rather doing it yourself or going to a health club or any of those kind of things? Okay, so just like in the film presentation, it's basically the same question. What we're looking for them to do is, again, tell us why personal training, right? We want them to sell themselves on why they need personal training. And again, same thing here. You can tie that down in terms of accountability. They need instruction, motivation. Okay, so just reiterating that question as well. And especially now that they've seen the facility, they've gone through a session, they might add some other components of it. And again, it's kind of selling themselves on why they need your service without you even saying a word. And then you can, here is, do you think, if you have other, maybe it's unique technology or equipment or other scenarios, not that you want to get too technical here, but you might bring up certain aspects of your facility that you kind of point out. Again, will you find that helpful? Again, we want them to kind of sell themselves. Yeah, I really like the fact that you guys have that heart rate technology, and I'm able to see my intensity. Or yeah, I really like that you guys are a private studio instead, and I don't want this way. There's not all the crowds, and so get them talking about those things. And again, they're selling themselves, on that. Okay. And we move really into the meat and potatoes of this consultation, which is really the pain funnel, okay? And so the majority of the consultation is spent here. That first part that you just saw, really is just a few minutes. It doesn't take very long to kind of go through that. And now we're moving into the pain funnel itself, okay? And so this is where we're going to ask multiple questions about their goals, okay? And I'll bring up we have another separate sheet that we call our best pain funnel questions. They're a good guide for you to use in terms of questions, but they're not the only ones. I like to kind of explain sometimes the questions that you ask in this section. The ones that we recommend are kind of a good framework for questions, and they kind of lead you down a path of making sure you're asking a lot of the key questions, but then you should really always be filling in between based on just what kind of comes to you, being engaged in that conversation, and again, being that professional where you're trying to dig deep and kind of unpeel the onion on the real problems and real issues, okay? So just our transition into this would be, all right, so what are your goals? What are you looking to accomplish? What can we help you with, okay? And then, we drill down, into the goals, and they might just say up front, I need to lose some weight, and I just want to get in better shape. Okay, okay, John. So how much? So then why are those goals important to you, John? And then just they'll explain why those goals are important, and then we start to drill down using our pain funnel questions. Okay, so let's take a look at those questions, and we'll talk a little bit about those as well. So this is the other sheet that'll be in your downloads. And so these are kind of, again, use this. It's not that you have to ask every single question, but by the way, you should ask, anywhere from 15 to 20 questions, no doubt about it. Like I said, the majority of the time is really spent drilling down here. If you go through this part of the consultation too quickly, you will not build the problem enough. You will not build enough pain and emotion potentially to get them to take that next step, okay? And especially borderline folks, if somebody was, really love this session and, has all the resources in the world, and yeah, maybe that's an easy transition. But folks that, love this session, but maybe this is a real commitment to them, something maybe they saved up for or whatever else, this is the difference between signing up that client or not. And it's also the difference between somebody signing up for, a small program, a short-term program, and again, a high-ticket sale, long-term program that they can get transformational results. Okay, so we really have to drill down into this section. So we've kind of broken down into kind of the most common for a general personal training studio. Again, I'll talk about kind of how you can modify this if you're a different type of facility. So you got kind of weight loss, tone, energy, and stress. So if you're a typical general fitness facility, or even if you niche within general fitness, but these are the typical goals you'd see, then this will work out great for you. Um, so again, a lot of times you're going to start right away. Somebody says, "Well, I want to lose some weight and I want to get in shape." So I'd start off first of all, well, how much weight do you want to lose, right? So I want to know what that weight is. Well, I'm looking to lose 20 or 30 pounds. Okay, don't let them get off the hook just with like that right there. Well, 20 or 30, that's a 10-pound difference, right? So you're like, well, hey John, is it 20 or is it truly 30? Oh, so yeah, probably 30 pounds. Okay, 30 pounds, great. And you said, get in shape. Can you kind of elaborate on that for me a little more? What does get in shape mean to you, right? That's often a common term, folks. You want to really, again, elaborate on that so you kind of get a better idea, and that might help you with some future questions as well. Okay, so once you kind of have a better idea of what weight loss it means to them, and then also getting in better shape, or maybe they said they want to improve their strength, once you kind of have a little more clarity on the goals, you're going to write those goals down on the intro summary sheet that we provide for you. Okay, you're going to write them down on there. Again, you should have a clipboard with that sheet as well as the price sheets underneath it. Okay, we don't want them to see the price sheets quite yet. So we have the intro summary sheet over the top of it on a clipboard. Again, we got a pen. We're professionals, right? We're taking notes. There's no reason, in fact, a great little tip here, pro tip for you is sometimes if you lose your train of thought on some of these questions or where you're kind of going with it, just having that clipboard up and writing notes, even if you're just kind of scribbling a little bit to kind of collect your thoughts, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, it doesn't mean you have to talk every second. You can pause if you need to. Okay, so that's kind of a little pro tip to kind of, if you lose your bearings a little bit. Sometimes in the beginning too, besides the intro summary sheet, somebody might have this sheet as well. Again, as long as, somebody doesn't see it or doesn't think you're just rehearsed or any of that kind of stuff, it can be something at least that you can kind of glance to fairly quickly, okay? So just a little tip there as well. But otherwise, you write down those main goals. It could be 1 or 2 or 3 main goals, and so it's okay, John. So it's weight loss and improve your strength. Feel like you've lost some strength there. That's what you meant by getting in better shape. Okay, great. So, well, let's start with weight loss. So let's drill down on that one a little bit, John. So how much weight do you want to lose? Again, like I said, they might give you a range. You kind of get them to pin down to that. Then you're going to move into, how long has that weight been a problem? How did you put on the weight? Okay, and by the way, don't shy away from the word problem, right? Because you're afraid, like, again, we want to drum up some emotion there. We want them to realize it's a problem, right? People don't buy a solution until they have a problem first, until they understand they have a problem, right? How did you put on the weight? What have you tried to do to lose the weight? Then why hasn't it worked? Then sometimes they might even, give you a couple different things, in terms of what they've tried. And you might have to break those out separately and say, so you did this, so why do you think that didn't work? Okay, and then you go to the next one. Well, so you tried that. Tell me a little more about that. Why didn't that work for you? Okay, and so you kind of break that down, kind of peel it down further. But sometimes some people will, oh yeah, I did XYZ diet, and why didn't that work? Well, it actually did. I lost about 10 pounds, and so that one actually worked out. And so a lot of times your follow up to that is then, oh, did you keep that weight off? And the answer is usually no, right? So then you follow up again. Say, so it really didn't work out for you, did, huh? Right? And so again, you're not being real too sassy about it. Again, being professional about it, just trying to get them to realize, well, that didn't create, long-term weight loss or a lifestyle change for them. Okay, and that's really, you're going to spend actually a lot of, decent amount of time here. And like I said, these are more framework questions too. Sometimes you're going to have what I call filler questions that just based on what they said, you might have a follow-up to that don't necessarily fit within these 4. Okay, and just look at this as like I'm proceeding from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and I might have some follow-up questions in there, and sometimes even just basic stuff like, how do you feel about that? Right, so feel draws emotion. So how do you feel about that? Or did that frustrate you at all? Right, so sometimes very open-ended questions like that in between these can, again, dig deeper, unpeel that onion a little bit further. Okay, and then usually I look at it, these last 3 as potential kind of wrap-up questions for this section before I kind of move on. And, has your doctor said that you need to lose any weight, or had any health concerns related to this? And even if he hasn't, what you're doing there sometimes is implying to them that, there could be health issues on the way, right? And obviously, sometimes you strike gold because there is, right? And so then you might drill down further on that health issue, like, oh yeah, my blood pressure's high. I just started taking medication. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Jeez, yeah, that's too bad, right? So, as your husband or wife kind of sent any hints your way in terms of you wanting to lose weight, okay? So again, that's an emotional question too that they their significant other, has sent hints their way or said anything about that. That's a pain point, right? And then we kind of cap it all off with, how do you feel with the extra weight, right? How do you feel about the extra weight? How do you feel with it, right? And so it's a feel question, right? Draws emotion, right? And then a lot of times we're going to move into some, in terms of toning, because a lot of times if somebody's looking to lose weight, kind of more, again, get in shape, they want to tone up, those are things they say. Then you'll talk about, well, let's talk about toning, and they might even mention a couple things and how they want their stomach to be smaller, tone their arms, or whatever those things are. So you might say, well, what do you consider your problem areas? What is it that you don't like about it? What have you done to improve those areas? And then why hasn't it worked, right? So and then basically you'll really kind of drill down on all those areas and kind of rinse and repeat. Okay, so tell me about your, stomach. You mentioned that. Okay, boom, 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 hit all those, right? Same thing. Okay, so you said you wanted to really tone up your arms. What is it that you don't like about your arms? And then sometimes, if it seems awkward to you, sometimes you might, depending on kind of, again, the communication or situation, you might simply say something like, hey, listen, or sometimes I had comments where people are like, well, isn't it obvious? Well, Sally, I mean, what they say about assuming, right? I mean, if I assume, and I've made that mistake before where, I don't want to insult anybody about what I think. So it's really more important about what you think. Okay, so that's why I ask. And if it seems like, maybe I'm repeating the same question, it's a little bit silly. It's really important for us to fully understand your situation. So sometimes, again, that's some place you go if that kind of comes up. All right, and then if they say something, why hasn't it worked? Then, why not? Why didn't it work, right? And so again, you'd kind of rinse and repeat in that cycle. And then same thing, just like weight loss, you'd spend most of your time kind of in this section, and then you kind of have some, 2 or 3 questions you kind of wrap up the toning section with. How do you feel about your shape? So you're trying to just more body image stuff. Do you find that you have multiple clothes in your closet? Does your weight fluctuate a lot? Or do you find that it's hard to buy the clothes that fit well, or the kind of clothes that you want to buy? Okay, so we're asking questions again about body shape, image, things of that nature. Okay, again, typical person, that's really, you're going to center most of the time there, and then you kind of wrap up based on your prior information. Do you know if they mention anything about energy or stress? If you don't know, then you usually will, just probe on this initially. And do you have, as much energy you'd like? On a 1 to 10 scale, John, where would you put your energy at? Okay, now if they say, a 4, okay, well, you're like, oh, wow, okay. Now you can ask some of these additional questions to kind of drill down on that further, and to kind of, again, build the problem, continue to build the pain and the problem. Then you move on to stress. Same thing, a 1 to 10. If you find it's a problem, if they say, oh, no, it's like a 1. Okay, great. Then you can move on. You're obviously not going to ask these questions if it's not a problem. Okay, so these are a couple other just big areas to people that once you find, where they are on the scale, you may spend some more time there. Okay. Now the other thing I want to point out is, again, if it's not weight loss, these questions are easily adaptable to different types of goals. Okay, so if they have a back problem or something, it could be how long's your back been a problem? Okay, how did you put on the weight? Or in this case, how long's it been a problem? How did you hurt your back? Or when did you notice it started to become an issue for you? Okay, what have you done to lose the weight? Okay, in this case, what have you done to fix to help to remedy your back issues? Why hasn't that worked for you? Okay, so those are questions easily adaptable, and I'd say if your scenario is definitely different than the traditional scenario, then you're going to want to use this as kind of a guide and look for similar types of questions that you could formulate into a separate kind of pain funnel questions. So maybe if you are more of a corrective exercise facility or post rehab, then it might be different, and you can modify them to if it's your sports performance facility. You're still gonna drill down on areas, right? And so you could do it more related to performance issues that people typically have that become an issue for them, right? So understanding where they're not satisfied with their sports performance, whether they want to improve, okay? And so we can help you that too, in your critiques that you send in and your coaching calls as well. But a lot of times, just looking at those and kind of in your head, kind of respinning that to like how long's X, Y, and Z been a problem? What have you tried to do to fix that? Why hasn't it worked? I mean, that can fit basically anything. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the rest of the consultation. Again, we've really spent the majority of time here, and we're really getting close now to that kind of climax of the consultation. We've built a lot of problems, issues. At least it's probably become self-evident to them at this point that they have even bigger problems maybe than they thought. You've brought that emotion, brought everything to the surface for them to be able to see. So then we want to really hold up the mirror and help them understand that we understand their problem. Okay, we see it clearly. And then also sometimes even for them, as a lot of stuff is just maybe swimming around in their head about the issues that you've discussed, that you're going to concisely kind of really hit it hard, right? And hit that problem building really hard. So let's take a look at how we do that. Okay, so we finish up the goals questions, and then we're going to move now into closing out this section. We ask them, how committed are you to achieving your goals right now on a 1 to 10 scale? Okay, so just going to kind of transition, finished up a lot of the goals questions. Great. So John, kind of wrapping up on some of the goals here. How committed are you to achieving your goals right now? Just let's say on a 1 to 10 scale. Okay. If they tell you 10, right, then you did a bang-up job right here, and it's time to move on. And you can say, great, now you move into the identifying their needs, and we further build the problem, and then we can transition, okay? Otherwise, if they say a 5, right, this is where we really can identify and flush out potential objections before we actually move forward into our rescue and our recommendation. And this way we don't have to deal with them at the end when we're asking for the purchase, basically, right? We want to deal with them early as we can. So if they say a 5, then we're going to ask them, well, John, why is it a 5? What's holding you back from it being a 10? Right? And then you're going to hear, what is it? What are some of those? If they bring up, price, or I don't know if I can afford it, or any of those kind of things, then we go through our question and answer approach, okay? Or we can use some of our reversals, which we'll talk about in a section coming up, okay? So we have separate sheets for that in terms of being able to, handle some of those and use a little bit different approach than kind of your classic objection handling. But this is where we want to understand where those are. We want to try to solve them right now before we move on, okay? So that's critical. This way you're not getting stuck at the end, right, with one of them. We're going to resolve that early so you can proceed. Key strategy right here, okay? And at the very least, if you find out somehow you're not able to resolve it here and you've spent some time on it with some of the methods that we'll talk about, at least it's probably going to be a sticking point at the end. And you kind of, as you're proceeding, you already kind of have in your mind that how am I going to handle that if that comes up at the very end again, okay? All right. So if I get a great 9 or 10, even if I get a 9, I might say, well, what's going to push John to get it to a 10? What's holding you back from it being a 10? I mean, again, it could be just one little thing, but we really want to resolve that. And then we just kind of wrap up. So John, anything else you want to add in terms of your goals, just so I better understand them before I can give you my recommendations and what I think? No, I think I'm good. Okay, great. Well, here's what I've heard you say, John. And this is kind of more of a classic scenario. Again, this obviously can be, adapted, but by being overweight, your clothes don't fit, your energy is holding you back, and you don't feel good about yourself or your body anymore. Okay. Plus, you've tried to fix this several times on your own or with various programs, and frankly, it sounds like you've failed repeatedly. Again, don't shy away from some of those stronger terms if you do it in the right terminology so that we can keep the iron hot, in terms of the pain and emotion piece. And then we just ask, assumptive agreement here. So it's isn't that right? Okay, and if yeah, no, that sounds like you nailed it, Pete, and it sounds like you definitely, yeah, I'd have to agree, right? So this is really, we're holding up that mirror. We're really kind of pushing, that problem, helping them. We're identifying what their needs are before you build that problem further with them. Okay, so easily modifiable. I mean, really, the first line is just all about, and you should be taking notes on that summary sheet to kind of. And a lot of times when I was doing it, I'd circle like what I already thought would be some of the hot points in there if they weren't this kind of traditional, classic scenario right here. If it was somebody maybe with sports performance, it might be a little bit different, in terms of, what that is, by, not having the speed that the explosive speed that you're looking for. You're not satisfied with your exit velocity in terms of hitting. That's really been holding you back in terms of getting the playing time that it sounds like that you really want to, or making it to the next level, right, or something like that, right? So you can see easily, modified based on that scenario. Then we move into building the problem. So we've identified the needs to help them, see that we understand their situation, which is important, and then we build that problem. So okay, John, so really, these are all just symptoms of the main problems that it sounds like you have, okay? And you're not alone. This is pretty common. First of all, it sounds like, not having the knowledge of how to put together a complete program to get the results you want is one of your biggest problems. Secondly, not having a plan that integrates all components required for success and customized to your current health and fitness needs is holding you back as well. And lastly, just not having a support system and some form of accountability to help you stick with your commitments that are required to make the lifestyle changes necessary to not only achieve your goals, but to be able to maintain them for life. Okay, John. Well, the good news here is that we can definitely help you. Okay, we've had great success with hundreds of clients with these exact goals and exact problems. Okay, so let me tell you about our program, and let me tell you how we're going to help you solve those problems. Okay, so that's all we're doing here. And think of these 3 points as, again, just not having the knowledge, right? Most people are coming to you because they don't have the knowledge about health, fitness, nutrition, any of those things, okay? Or they have a cursory knowledge, or they're confused because there's so much misinformation out there. Doesn't matter. So again, you can say it however you want, but that's really what you're trying to get across, is that they don't have the knowledge to put together a complete program that actually gets results, okay? Then the second part, you're talking about, having a complete program in terms of that integrates all components, right? Fitness, nutrition, accountability, all the other components for them to succeed, and also to be customized to them specifically, right? So there's lots of information out there, but what fits their needs, their body type, all those sort of things. And so that's kind of what you're saying here. Again, you can put that into your own words on what's concise. And then lastly, the support system in a form of accountability, okay? And that's really one of the biggest benefits, as personal trainers we provide for people, is that scheduled appointment and accountability and support to be able to stay to and stick with their program. So again, however you want to phrase that, this is just suggested language. You're really trying to hit on those things. And if you think about it, that's usually the problem, is people don't have the knowledge to put together a plan, and they don't have a support system or accountability to really keep them on track, okay? Then the rescue is that, again, climax, where we're really saying, here's the good news. We can definitely help, okay? And we've helped hundreds of clients with these exact problems and goals, okay? Very important. It might seem like very basic language there, but I've experienced, I've seen it myself, that again, we can definitely help because of that upfront agreement that you had with them. And again, like I said, a lot of times you'll see them, they experience relief, right? And so this is where you've told them earlier that if you feel like there's a good fit, you'll recommend a couple programs, and you'll let them know that you can help them. And so that's really what you're doing here, right? So you want to make sure you get those 2 points. The other thing we're doing is that we've had great success with people just like you, right? Everybody thinks they're different, right? And a lot of times we know when we work with a lot of people, there's a lot of commonalities, but everybody thinks they're different, or maybe they can't do it, or maybe is this program going to be right for me? Or maybe they didn't see a lot of clients when they're in your facility. Are other people like me here, right? They want to be in a place where they're going to feel comfortable. And so a lot of factors can kind of come into that simple language of, saying we've had a lot of great success with clients, with the exact problems and goals you have, okay? And then we just transition to, so let me, tell you about our program and how we're going to help you solve those problems, okay? So this section is really, where kind of that, fitness expert, professional comes out in you, okay? Where, usually through the other sections, and by the way, I didn't mention in the pain funnel, you really have to hold back on solving their problem, okay? A lot of times somebody will be like, well, it didn't work because of this and that, whatever, and right away you want to rescue them and say, yeah, that's because you didn't do this and you didn't do that, and you did. You wanna completely avoid that. You're okay. Sometimes I know early on when you're new to this, you'll want to rescue people early on. They'll say, I have this problem, and you want to solve it for them right away. You've got to keep your mouth zipped and just keep asking those questions, keep unpeeling the emotion, because this is where you're going to solve those things. And you might be jotting notes down so that you can really hit this rescue even more powerful, because you're pulling out some points that came up in the pain funnel that so if you find yourself wanting to rescue yourself, hold yourself back, and that should be a reminder. Write a quick note on the intro summary sheet in terms of under, rescue, like where I'm going to, hit these things in my rescue, okay? Now, optionally, you can have a PowerPoint or an iPad here or a flip chart or something like that that explains your system, or technology for solving their problem. And so I do encourage you to have, a pre-planned, system or explanation here about how you get people results and how you solve those problems. Now, again, you might add a couple little customizations and tweaks based on that information you heard earlier where you wanted to solve those problems for them, and you want to kind of tie that into your kind of your pitch here. This is kind of your your benefits and features aspect of your business, that your system on how you solve the problem. You want to have that method where pretty scripted on how you're going to explain it, but then just add in those customizations based on their personal situation. Okay, and so an example here, maybe in a basic facility, just might be, talking about, you might name your program, the XYZ essentials, right? And so the essentials might be, you got to have, resistance training, moderate aerobic exercise, supportive nutrition, and a good support system. Okay, and so let me tell you, those might all sound like common sense, jam, but let's talk about each three of these essentials that we have in our program and how they're going to help you. Okay, first, with resistance training, this is an important part of your program, obviously here, and obviously you see it here because it's not just about muscle toning, but we really want to increase your metabolism. Okay, weight training is usually often overlooked as a method for helping people lose weight. They often think of cardiovascular exercise first. Actually, weight training is more important because we can increase your metabolism in two different ways, right? So just giving you an example, then you'd hit, moderate cardio, not long drawn out cardio, because that can be counterproductive, etc. How does nutrition play a supportive role in that? Then again, the accountability aspect of things. So that's just an example. Now you might have another way, but the key here is, you want to have it fairly tight and in a clear way, and we can help you on this. Again, on your coaching calls and critiques on how you do this. Again, a visual is helpful to be able to kind of lay that out for them. It's not 100% necessary. I did it for years and years and years without anything visual, but it can definitely be helpful. There's a lot of kind of research in terms of sales that can help people kind of comprehend, what you're talking about. I would just, again, encourage you to personalize it, though, based on some of those hot buttons that you heard earlier. And make sure you fit those into it, okay? But don't overdo this either. Don't throw up on them with too much information, or we're gonna flip out of emotion and move into logic, okay? And we don't want that. We're kind of at that climax here where we want to show them we can solve that problem. Do it with great energy and confidence, and I'm gonna solve this problem for John, and John, here's how we're gonna do it, right? If you get too long-winded here, you have people kind of fade out on you, and that's, again, where kind of all emotion kind of goes away, and they just want to kind of move on and get out of Dodge. So we want to be short and concise in this area. right? Then after we've done that, we've explained it to them. So then we transition, say, well, John, the last question I have for you, and probably the most important, is, do you feel ready to, and then you insert those goals. Do you feel ready to lose that 20 pounds and improve that back issue that you have and get in overall better shape? All right. Do you feel mentally ready? And so I'm going to go to the next line before they even answer that. Okay. So I don't want them to answer it quite yet. I'm going to go on to, do you feel mentally ready to commit to working on those goals? Okay, John, I know it might sound like a stupid question, but if you're not ready, then we can't help you. Okay, and you may want to try the Y, or we can help you find just a regular gym somewhere. Okay, like I said, I know it might sound like a stupid question, but it's a real critical one. Otherwise, we're just not going to be able to help you. So are you ready to commit to those goals? Are you mentally ready? Okay, no, sometimes the answers you get are, yeah, I wouldn't be here otherwise. That's why I'm here. And then it's great. Okay, great, perfect, right? So we just want to make sure we get that commitment, because now if they make that commitment here, guys, it's going to be even harder for them to say no to you now in your recommendation. So we're moving into the close. We're going to present the program to them now. Okay, and so it makes it even more difficult for them to do it. It's from a psychological standpoint. You could surface a couple, objections again here, just like we did that preliminarily a little bit earlier. I mean, by the way, somebody might say like, well, you already asked them that kind of on the 1 to 10 scale, but trust me, they don't kind of technically remember that, and it really doesn't matter. You're just trying to build some momentum here, going to the commitment to flush out anything if you didn't flush it out earlier, and then gain that commitment. Like I said, from a psychological standpoint, it becomes even more difficult for them to say, hey, no, Pete, I'm not going to do this, right? When they just told you, like, yeah, that's why I'm here, I'm ready to go, right? They're all we're at that climax point again, where I'm ready to go, let's do this, right? That's kind of what you're really looking for out of this area. All right, so this is extremely important. You want the prospect to commit to making a change in their life. If they do it, becomes less about money, and again, it becomes more about lifestyle change. Okay, again, kind of line with the Y line, or takes away that kind of sales pressure. Again, lets them know we're not right for everybody. We're not chasing them. We don't just take every check that comes in the door. Okay, so that's kind of our mentality there. And a lot of times I like to say too, like, oh, we can help you find a regular gym, right? That kind of re-emphasizes that you're different than the normal gym. So that's kind of why we have that in there as well. If you don't get or if you get an I don't know, ask them what's holding them back. So again, we use kind of our answer. And we reiterate the pain points that we had earlier, so that's why we're taking some notes on it. We can also use what we call reversals, which we have some examples of that on a separate sheet we'll get to in a little bit. Okay, so those are all ways that we kind of handle some of those objections as you go along. Okay, then we move into the most, one of the more important pieces. Obviously, everything, if we do the top part well, this goes pretty smoothly here. But I do know that there's a difference between the folks that close 85% versus maybe 60, 70%. They're really good at this section and guiding people to the sale. Okay, that's a real important element of being able to guide them to the sale. We're not hard closing here or anything like that. We're truly just making our recommendation here, and then we're going to kind of pull them along as being the fitness leaders and guide them to the sale. Okay, and if you just kind of bump them along, that's what I call it, is bumps, or nudge them along, and don't always look for the yes or any of those kind of things. You're only waiting for them to just say no, to be honest with you. You're going to proceed forward because you're assumptive, right? They've committed. You're assuming that they're going to become a client. You're assuming that they're going to take your recommendation because we've already gained those commitments earlier. So we're only really waiting for them to say no for whatever reason. Okay, we're not waiting for it, but that's the only thing that will be an obstacle for us. Otherwise, we continue to proceed. Okay, so here, we're just gonna be great. What I'm going to do then is recommend a couple of our middle programs to you then, John. Okay, one of these programs is going to be 3 times a week, and the other program is 4 times a week. Okay, so now remember, in your session, that's why I said the end of your session, some of the scripting we have in there is critical, where we talk about the how often most of our clients come in. Okay, so that scripting is in that part of the intro consult, the session piece, where you talk about in terms of a lot of questions our clients have is, how often should I come in? Well, Most of our clients come in either 3 or 4 times a week. We consider 3 to be very good in the normal, and really 4 times a week is really for people that are looking for quicker results, right? And so we explained that, again, intellectual part in the session. By the way, who doesn't want quicker results? Hopefully you caught that, and you caught that in the scripting, right? Lots of people want quicker results, right? So that's why we say that. So we handle that there. So now it's just a matter of making that decision. And we even said at the end of the session, I'll present you a couple of those programs, and you can pick or choose what you think is a better fit for you. I'm pretty good with either one of those, okay? So that's what we're doing here is, again, we're selling transformation. We don't sell number of sessions. We sell time frame and transformation, okay, and the frequency. So 3 or 4 times a week. Now, I don't know if I mentioned it yet how our programs work, but we're pretty simple. We don't require any memberships or contracts. We're simply on a per session basis, and you can purchase sessions in bulk, so to speak. So in other words, the more sessions you purchase, the lower your session rate, okay? So guys, we bring this up because, sometimes if you're not handling, hopefully as you're delegating and training people up and you have staff and you're growing, other people are handing phone presentations or walk-ins and scheduling consultations, and maybe you're doing the consultation. They obviously should have handled this. But you're really kind of just bringing it up in case they don't remember or aren't quite sure. But you're just providing them a little information there, so when you do present the price sheet to them, they're not kind of like, totally confused, or how does your program work, or any of those sort of things. So we just kind of bring that up. We don't have we don't require, because we do have obviously some memberships, but we don't require them, right? Because we have our packages or contracts. So that's kind of a plus. Compared to maybe some places that only require memberships or contracts. So you're saying we don't require them, simply on a per session basis. People like simple, right? You can purchase them in bulk, so to speak, etc. So that's kind of why we bring that information into play. But most importantly, then we transition to, John, based on your goals of, wanting to lose that 30 pounds, fix those back issues, you want to just overall improve your strength and you regain that strength that you feel like you've lost. What I'm going to recommend is about a 6-month type of program, okay? This is really for 2 important reasons. One, you will have made significant progress towards achieving those goals, okay? And depending on their goals, you might say will have achieved those goals, okay? But I think the most important thing for you is to establish a consistent pattern of exercise and make it a habit, kind of like brushing your teeth, right? Just get up every morning, you brush your teeth. We want that to be that way for you in terms of exercise. And I know that might seem like it just, couldn't possibly happen for you right now, but that's why we need, more than, let's say, a 2 or 3 month period where you wouldn't be able to establish that actual habit of doing this. So in 6 months, you'll be in the best shape you've ever been in years, okay, or you've been in years, okay, which makes it even easier to continue exercising. Plus, you'll be used to exercising 3 to 4 times a week, and you'll become one of those people that just can't go without it, right? They just really, they don't feel as good. They don't have the energy they do without exercising. So it becomes almost addicting in a good way, okay? And that might be hard for you to imagine now, but that's what happens when you do it consistently and long enough, okay? You might have, maybe even mind potentially longer than 6 months that I'm recommending, but I want to give you the minimum recommendation that I believe it would take for me to help you to get there, okay? And if you want to commit to a longer time frame, that's completely up to you, but I don't want to kind of have you overcommit to something. If a lot of people do tend to go longer than 6 months because they realize they didn't get here, out of shape overnight, so they won't be able to correct it overnight. But I'm just giving you my minimum guidelines of what I'm looking for, okay? So this comes down to 2 of our programs, okay? So now I lean forward. I got the price sheet on my clipboard, and I'm going to circle our 80 and 100 session package on our price sheet, okay? And then I'm just going to write on one side, I'm going to write 3 right next to the 80. And I'm going to say, so this one here is our 80 session package at 3 times a week. This will last you approximately 6 months. Then I write a 4 right next to the 100 session, and I let them know that at 4 times a week, this one is approximately 6 months. Either one I think is great for you, John. Again, it just depends. 3 is more than normal. If you're looking for quicker results, then our experience, we find that 4 times a week is definitely going to get people there quicker. But I'm good with either one in your case. So which do you prefer? Or what are you thinking? Okay, so this is kind of our first bump, our first test close to move them along. We're not asking them whether they want to do the program or not, or anything like that. We're asking them which one do they prefer. Okay, Is it 3? Are you thinking 3, John? Or are you thinking 4? Sometimes you kind of prop that along. Okay, and then if they say, I'm leaning towards 3 to start. Great. Now what we want to do is reinforce that decision and make it a positive one. Okay, great. I think that's a great choice for you, John. I think that's a great place to start. And by the way, too, John, if you get into it and you're 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, and you definitely want to kind of accelerate those results, you can always upgrade, to 4. That's what's nice about these package options, is it gives you some flexibility, to be able to do that as well. So by all means, we can communicate about that as we go along. So I think 3 is a great place to start. So there's 2 ways that you can pay for this program. Okay, you can pay the full amount up front, or you can pay in 3 consecutive monthly payments. Okay, just so you know, it is a couple dollars more per session to break it up, but some of our clients like the convenience of breaking it up, and others would rather save the money. Okay, so what do you prefer? Okay, so this is my next test close. Okay, so I'm just moving on to how they pay for it. It's going to be a question. They're kind of looking at it. They're looking at the price sheet. So after they pick 3, you move to this, and we tell them there's 2 options. They can either do the full pay or the split pay. And by the way, this scripting right here is very, very critical. I can tell you through personal experience, I tested this, and it actually moved more people to the full pay than the split pay by saying, just so you know, it's a couple dollars more per session to break it up. But some people like the convenience of breaking it up, right? So that's kind of the way of saying, it's fits their budget better, right? So it's kind of a nice way of saying that. Others would rather save the money. Okay, now a piece right there. If somebody has the cash flow, they're the kind of person that we're attracting to our business. They're the kind of person that truly understands, like, that's how they make money and they save money, right? Is they have the ability, they have the buying power, right? And so they rather save that money. So very important on how you say that. Actually, believe it or not, moves you more to more full pays by going through that. Okay, but either way, we'll take either one of those. Right, those are still 2 high ticket programs that we have up front. Right, and we don't say a word. Right, we let them to kind of make that decision in terms of where they want to go. We reinforce it. Okay, great. So if they pick one of them, then sounds good. So let's the next steps, Jan. We're going to move to the fitness assessment. We're going to get that scheduled. We're going to get some baseline measurements during this assessment, so we can personalize your program, and also so you get some baseline measures and you can see your inches change over time and see your fitness improve and all that good stuff. Okay, and also I'll get you some initial paperwork. Take payment today so we can lock in some additional sessions, going forward as well. And so let's head up to the front desk and take care of that, okay, or wherever you do that in. Okay, so that's kind of, sometimes that little bit of time and explanation there is if there's, there's some hesitation or whatever, that you're giving them a little bit of time, okay, because we don't want somebody going out with buyer's remorse or anything like that. But by talking about the next step, it gives them a little bit of time if they have, an issue with that, okay. Now that's obviously if it, you're bumping along, if it moves smoothly. Okay, now if somebody has an issue with the full pay or the split pay, and they're kind of like, it's a little bit more than what I thought it would be. Okay, that might be the typical response, right? Oh, it's a little more than I thought it would be. And then you might ask a question. So what do you mean by that, John? Do you mean just in terms of, having to, pay kind of the larger full payment up front, or even the split pay doesn't fit the budget at all? Is that what you're saying? So try to, again, ask questions, get clarification. Like, yeah, it's a little bit just, more than I can afford right now, or swing. And just, well, John, let me ask you a question. So it's even the split pay here in terms of breaking into 3 payments just doesn't fit your budget right now. No. Is it just that the payment amounts are too high? Yeah. Okay. Well, let me ask you, John. Then what if we were able to get those in, let's say, the around the $500 to $700 range, and would that be something that would fit in your budget? Would that work for you better, in terms of on a monthly basis? No, yeah, that might work for me. Okay, and so that's our question to clarify. So then what we can do is we can move then into our monthly programs, right? Well, let me show you our monthly programs, John. And then we take the other price sheet out, we flip it over, and then I circle the 3 times a week, because he already agreed to 3 times a week for 6 months. So John, here's the 3 times a week, 6 months. The most important thing to me, John, is that, right? Is at the end of the day, I need that time frame and that frequency minimum in order for me to help you achieve the goals that we've talked about today, okay? How you do that, whether you do the other program in terms of the package, or on a monthly basis, that's really irrelevant to me. It doesn't matter. I just know what it's going to require to get you to your goals. Okay. And the only reason I didn't show you this before is, frankly, the other programs are kind of our most popular programs, and because it saves people a little bit of money. In terms of some of the programs, and they're a little bit more flexible in terms of session wise. So, but this is great too, because at the end of the day, most important thing is the time frame and frequency to get you to your goals. All right. So, how does this work? All right. And so, then you're going to navigate from there. So you always questions or clarify. Now, let's say you said it is that $500 to $700 range or whatever it is for your 6-month monthly. If that's like, no, that's even too much. Okay, then you would move to your semi-private if that's a service offering you have, or that's another reason I encourage another offering, whether it's semi-private or large group. Then you'd move to that and say, well, what about this range? Okay, and yeah, no, that's more reasonable. Well, then let me talk to you then about our semi-private personal training. Okay, this is how it works. You talk, it's just as personalized, etc. But in a sense, you're sharing a trainer, right? And so it actually does save you a little bit of money. It's not like quite the one-on-one we did today, but really for you, the most important thing is to have a scheduled appointment. You need a personalized program, and you need somebody, to instruct you, like we talked about the main issues, before. And so I think this would be a great fit for you. Let me show you what that. Would you like to see what that program looks like, right? And then you move into those, and that's going to be more into their price point. So that's kind of how we move down. I mean, it's pretty simple. We got to find out what truly is their budget range based on those facts, and we got to know that really what we're selling is our knowledge, the ability to design a complete program, right? So in the problem build, we talked about those 3 points: the ability to have a support system, hold them accountable to the commitments, all those things. So we're letting them know that's a great option. It's still going to help them accomplish those things. It's going to still help them solve those problems. We're just delivering it a little bit different, okay, as opposed to maybe our direct one-on-one, okay? So let's move into some of the other resources that I referenced before that kind of help you with, like the reversing, also kind of the flow charts for guiding them through these potential objections, and some of the other resources that kind of fill in the blanks that we talked about in this consultation piece. So this is just a good example, a reminder for just kind of sales scenarios. Again, you recommend a package, they accept it, you obviously congratulate them, right? In this case, you recommend a package, they choose a smaller package than recommended. We offer them the monthly plan for the same commitment length, like we talked about. They accept it, we congratulate them on their decision, right? If they decline it, then what we do is, so in this case, let's say they selected the 40 session package instead of your 80 or 100 recommendation. What we'd want to do actually instead is move them to our monthly 6-month plan, because we want the longer term commitment. And obviously the long-term value of that client's going to be longer. Even though I know it's tempting to take the 40 session, 2,000 up front, you're better off in a 6-month commitment, A, because they're going to get better results, and B, it's actually more revenue for the entire year, right? So if they decline that, then you can say, well, we can definitely go with the 40 sessions, and then we talk to them about the ability to upgrade in a couple weeks, okay? And so we just say to them, John, just so you know, we do allow people, that's fine, that sounds like, good, at least we're getting a good start, and as you go along and you see this is the right fit for you, then just so you know, you can upgrade this within your first couple weeks. However, after 2 weeks, we won't be able to upgrade that program anymore. So would you like me to give you kind of a reminder maybe in a couple weeks or so? And so we have an upgrade process for this that we teach in our academies and some of our other modules in terms of upgrading through this. I just kind of gave you the basic version. It's not real hard. You kind of plant the seed for the upgrade, and then you ask them if they want to follow up, and you follow up in a couple weeks with them about that. Okay. Otherwise, here, recommend a package they don't accept. We challenge their commitments, and address some of those objections. If they accept that, great. Then we congratulate them, and then in this case, if they decline it, then we again move to monthly, like I just gave you an example. If they accept it, we congratulate them. If they decline it, then we might use a takeaway, again, challenge them on the pain points. And if not, then we kind of part friends and call it a day. All right. So last one, potential scenarios. You recommend a package. They want to commit but can't afford it. You want to challenge their commitments, and then they might accept it. So sometimes, again, you don't just go down right away. Sometimes kind of challenge that commitment. Again, use a mini tight takeaway. Otherwise, again, offer the monthly rate. If they decline, then same thing. Challenge the commitment, reiterate pain points, and use some of our reversing or takeaway. So just a reminder on those potential scenarios and kind of where you would steer through those. And this is the bumps that we were just talking about. So I recommend, so similar, but this is the main flow. So I recommend these programs. I give the rationale on why, right? Then I bump them, test close number 1, 3 or 4 times a week, right? So that's kind of in the other script as well. Test close number 2, split pay option, full pay, all right? And then if they decline, we overcome those objections. We use our reversing or takeaway sheets. Like I said, we might have bumped them kind of all the way down. So I kind of went through that full scenario before with you, okay? And then lastly, the other resource is our reversing and taking control. So this is a lot of times where it's a much better way to handle certain objections, and so we actually reverse the objection. So this is an example of putting the prospect, the prospects put pressures on the answer the vague questions or statements. So your job is to gently reverse them so you can make sure to understand the real issue at hand. So the first question is rarely the real question, okay? Your prospect must completely define the original question or statement. Right? The only way to truly find the pain is to dig beneath the surface and find out why they have that question or statement or their objection, okay? So intent is much more important than content, all right? It's much more important to understand why a question was asked or a statement made than it is to be prepared for a thorough response, okay? We want to understand why they have that question or objection, right? Because then we can really kind of peel down deeper to the real question, the real issue at hand that we resolve. If you're just trying to answer sometimes that surface question right away or objection, sometimes it's not the real issue, okay? So if you answer the question, you're usually assuming right away, or you're usually assuming way too much, okay? Understand the many different interpretations that can be made, right? So we also what we call softening statements. So we use softening statements when we question this. So in order for the prospect to be comfortable with this strategy, we have to soften your approach a little bit. So using softening statements to maintain rapport is very, very helpful. Okay, and so we'll give some examples on a little bit of this. Remember how important tonality and body language are when you're doing this. Softening statements communicates that you need to understand more. That's really what you're trying to use. The softening standard is, I'm kind of confused, Jan. I really don't understand, right? So there's different ways, and I got some examples of softening statements. So we need to clarify further. Okay, and we're going to start with softening statements to do that. Okay. Then the rule of 3 plus. All right, be prepared to reverse at least 3 times to get through your prospect's intellectual smoke screens. All right. If you anticipate and prepare, reversing will become easier and easier and easier. Okay. Know why it is what's asked is important and the impact of the issue. So until you reverse at least 3 times, you'll continue to get smoke. All right. Compare the difference between the real issue and the initial issue. All right. And you'll see the big difference there. Okay. So again, sometimes you kind of have to reverse that a few times. All right. So examples of softening statements. Okay. So you might get an objection, softening. Oh, that's a good question. Okay. I'm glad you asked that. Oh, I appreciate that question. Oh, I can respect that, John. Okay. That makes sense. Well, everybody asked that, John. Okay, so these are just real subtle ways to kind of open your reversing. Okay, and then we move into, so that's a good question, John. Suppose I could, so if I use the example like we talked about before, they have an issue with the large high-ticket program or the split pay. So it might be, I can appreciate that question, John, or I respect that, John. Suppose I could, break this into monthly payments and get it between that, $500 to $700 range. Would that, fit your budget or work better? Okay. And then moving through that. Okay. Other types of objections. So softening them up. If you were me, what would you do? Okay, so this is sometimes this can work great for a lot of different kind of objections. Sometimes people want to wheel and deal too, by the way, or something like that, and you reverse it. So again, we're reversing it. What if you were me, John? What would you do? Okay, so it's a really great way to reverse that. We'll spend more kind of on some reversing's after you get some of the main issues, and we've got some supplemental training for this as well. So I'm not going to spend as much. I want to just give you some surface understanding of reversals, and is pretty self-explanatory. But through the coaching calls and some of the example kind of role plays that we have and those sort of things, you'll kind of see where these kind of come more into play. And it really just comes down to practice. They're really not as hard as you think. When you have some good examples here, you'll tend to find some that you like the most, but we will dive into this more. So I just don't want to spend too much time here particularly. Okay, so but some really good ones. I get the feeling this. Yeah, one that typically use a lot. So, we have a problem. Any ideas how we could address this, right? So, reversing that to them. So there's a lot of different ways that we can use these. Like I said, we're gonna go through this more on coaching calls and role plays, sample role play videos that we have as well. Okay, so great technique to answer objections or um, get through some of those things that we're stalling. But the main thing is to understand is that we were looking to reverse the pressure. Sometimes you might have to reverse again 2 or 3 times to get to the real issue. Then once we get to the real issue, then you might say something like, well, suppose, John, I could do X, Y, and Z. Would that fix that issue for you? No, I suppose so. Well, great. Well, let's do that then, right? And so a lot of times you're unpeeling until you get to the real issue. Then you answer it with a solution, and then suppose, John, we're able to do this, right? And then we provide that answer. How does that work for you? Will that solve the problem? And then we proceed forward. So that's really, what we're trying to do. We start with a softening statement. We reverse it a couple times. I love like the reversing approach because you make them have to kind of solve that problem or almost answer their own objection. That's the beauty of doing this right. Okay. All right. So again, we'll spend some more time on this in role play and other examples like I mentioned earlier. Okay, so those were some of our sales scenarios and bumps, right? So very important that every sale is not going to go perfect. So you want to be good at understanding different sales scenarios and how they could go and how you can steer them through them, right? If they select a smaller package, I want to move them still to a longer term commitment, potentially on my monthly packages. They state they can't afford it, afford what you've recommended. Again, then we're going to use our softening statements, our reversals to try to understand the issue more. Then we can answer it and make an additional recommendation by bumping them into our monthly programs, or maybe we have to bump them all the way down to semi-private or whatever your other service offering is. Okay. And again, we'll hit this more and more in terms of role playing on the coaching calls, or other role play sample videos that will provide you as well, where you'll see more and more examples of these. Okay, so again, what about objection handling? Well, first we must take them off the table in our upfront agreement, right? So we talked about that right away. We're going to take away that I have to think about it right up front. So that one's eliminated, okay? Then typically it's just going to be a cost objection, okay? If it's a time objection, those are very easy to handle with reversing. The only other one is really kind of the spousal objection that a lot of times there's really not a clear answer for that, okay? So we'll talk in a second about kind of how we handle that spousal component of things. Okay. So second, we have to present them different solutions rather than forcing them down their throat. Kind of what we're doing. Again, we can push back initially up front, do a little softening statement reversal, but then we're going to end up steering because we're going to solve that. Once we kind of reversed it and we understand the real issue, right? Could be that it's not that they can't afford it at all, they just couldn't from a cash flow perspective. So that's where your monthly options come in. So we don't need to just try to drive that one down their throat. First press, again, we just simply ask questions to clarify, again using our softening statement and reversing, and then we listen to the objection first. We never interrupt. We question it with our softening statements and reversal to understand the issue, even if we have to do it 3 times. Then we answer it, right? And then we confirm that answer to remove the objection and ask for the sale again. Okay, so pretty simple. We don't do hard selling. Again, if you really understand reversing, and you will as we again role play these things more, and you see more role play video examples, and we do it in our coaching calls, you definitely get a better even hang of that. But I do want to emphasize here that too many sales systems and people, when they're thinking about sales, spend way too much time on objection handling. If you do the rest of what we've trained you on so far, you won't have a lot of them. It's usually just going to come down to cost, and maybe they have to talk to their spouse. Okay, so let's just talk about that real quick. How would you handle, like I said, the cost thing? That's the reverse thing. It's bumping them and trying to find the right program that truly is going to fit their budget. Okay, that we took the I got to think about it off the table in our upfront agreement. So usually the only other one that we can't handle with a reversal is typically going to be the spouse scenario. Okay, so we want to handle the spouse or significant other objection in a little different way. I mean, again, you're not going to be able to just, really overcome this. At the bottom line is sometimes people have to, run an investment like this by their significant other. And so we just want to know how we can handle this in the best case scenario in order to, again, increase our odds of them being a long-term client with us. So first, we tell them we understand, and we'd want to make sure that they can fully commit to the program. Okay, so this is another form of a softening statement, right, that we talk about in our reversing is, yeah, I can appreciate that, Chan. I really want to make sure that you can fully, commit to our program in the first place. So it's definitely important for you to get your spouse on board and fully committed too, because this way it's going to make it even easier for you to see the results, and frankly for somebody to support you at home in this process. So no, I think that's definitely a great idea. All right, but let me ask you a question. So then we want to ask them a question. Jan, can I ask you a couple more questions though? Do you agree with my recommendation? And it's just a matter of discussing this with your spouse out of courtesy to them, or is this something is this something that you definitely want to do? Okay, so we want to get clarity on whether they really want to do the program, and it's just a matter of discussing it with their significant other out of courtesy to you or out of courtesy to them, in terms of, again, that making that investment, maybe not spending that money without their knowledge or whatever else, right? So that's kind of what we're saying there. And so and then before they can really even answer that, we go or they might, yeah, no, that's definitely, well, okay, that makes perfect sense. So here's what we can do. Okay, and so then what we do is we move on and we say, what we can do then is we can actually schedule your fitness assessment, Jan, and all it requires is actually just $79 to reserve that spot, because obviously we're reserving, our time with you during that time, and then you can talk this over with your significant other, decide, what program you want to go with and how you want to pay for that. And then in the meantime, for us, we can prepare for your assessment, start to prepare, our team in terms of getting your program together and starting to build that program out, which takes us a little bit of time as well. And I think more important for you, it's just, again, keeping that ball rolling. Like you talked about, you're really committed to working on these goals, right? So we're going back to her commitment. You're really committed to them. I might reiterate some pain points here that kind of came up. And this way we can really keep that ball rolling. And in fact, if you decide, again, if you talk to your significant other and you end up going with the 80 sessions, that $79 will just credit it to that package, because it's actually the assessment's complimentary if you go with our 80 sessions or more. Okay, so is that something you'd like to do? Right, so that's all we're doing is we want to get that next commitment, that next stage, next action step, because usually they have a pretty good idea on how well that's going to go over. If they can't agree to that, then what you want to do is send them home with some ammunition, okay? And that's an important step, is to, basically you got to understand sometimes people don't understand how different your service is. Maybe they have a gym in mind, so they see that and it's like sticker shock to them. So, we literally say, if they kind of don't want to go that route, we'll say, well, Jan, okay, I can understand that. I tell you what, here's what's really important is when you're talking to, your significant other, just make sure that, they understand that we're obviously not a normal gym and that you're hiring a professional. It's kind of like, doing your taxes online versus hiring an accountant, right? I mean, it's like apples and oranges there. And so, if they want to talk to me by phone or even come in and visit the facility, by all means, let's do that so that they truly understand what kind of program you want to commit to, and how it's really, investing in your goals and your health and your future. Okay. And so I'm more than willing to, put in a little extra time to help clarify that, because I find that people don't truly understand, the expertise that and professionalism that you're trying to, hire to help you with your goals, and so they don't fully comprehend that. So that's the only recommendation I'd have for you. And then, should I follow up with you, or when can when can I expect to hear back from you? Okay, and then that's the case, and hopefully they get back to you. Again, it happens sometimes. It's the odds aren't as great in that case. Much better when you get the assessment. So that's usually an indication. If you get the assessment confirmed with that deposit for that assessment, it's usually a much better sign that you're probably likely. It might not be the ideal sale, but you're probably likely to move forward with it. In the case where you got to kind of send them home with ammunition, your odds decrease by a good 50% or so. But if you do that right, it does help. I mean, that is sending them home with some ammunition about what's important. Again, they got to sell their significant other on you, basically, and if you can assist in that with visiting them or a phone call, then that will definitely help the scenario. Okay, so there's some tips on that one. It's not an easy one, but you got to kind of steer through it. I really don't personally believe in just trying to, there's a kind of a tricky way to kind of get through this or whatever else. It usually doesn't work out for the best either way. So these are the two tactics that I feel have worked the best. And again, preserve our reputation, our brand too in the process, which is very important. Okay, so in conclusion, this system has sold millions of dollars in personal training. Okay, the only reason it won't work for you is if you don't take it serious enough and you just wing it. Okay, or you don't believe it'll work for you. So those are really the only reasons, because again, I know it's worked for me personally, and I've had managers, use it, and frankly, this has been improved and modified as we've been working with clients. This ain't even the exact same thing. It's actually better and modified and improved. So this will absolutely work for you as long as you believe it. Sales is just as much about confidence, passion, and conviction, and being able to help the prospect as anything. If they trust you and believe in you, they will buy from you. Okay, so this system will give you that confidence. Right? Remember, high ticket sales helps everybody. You got to remember that it helps them. They get transformational results, have a greater commitment. It obviously helps you in terms of your business and running a healthy, strong business, and helps your employees. Right? They have future. It allows you to invest in them more, and it also allows them to know that they've got future client sessions for a long period of time as you're signing people more up for longer and longer term commitments. Okay. Do not let your limiting beliefs get in your way. All it takes is selling your first 100 session program to see how easy it is, and then everything gets rolling. I can still remember the first 100 session program I sold very early on. It was like boom, then I was off to the races. Like, wow, that was easier than I thought, it went smoother than I thought, and it was just, there's no holding back at that point. Then we were off and running. Okay, so your homework: review the introductory session system and make adjustments based on your service type and facility layout. Read and mentally rehearse the introductory session and consultation scripts until you have them memorized. Role play the consultation at least 10 times with a spouse, friend, significant other, whoever it is, employee. Okay, role play, role play, role play. I know role playing isn't comfortable, sometimes it's odd, but it is the number one way to get good at this and be effective at it. Okay, and your business depends on it. Okay, I mean, geez, if we can't spend a lot of time role playing in order to make $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 sales that could change your life, basically change your business's future, especially if you're struggling now to get to the revenues that you want, then I don't know. I mean, you got to really make some decisions about getting out of your comfort zone then. Role play the entire process with a spouse, significant other, employee, and neighbor. Okay, so the entire thing from, the session to the consultation. So at first, you're going to really think about the session piece is a lot of times the easiest part for us. We just have to customize it to, our specific methods and those sort of things, but leave in the key elements that we have in there. The consultation is really the one that just takes rehearsal, and work and drilling down, and but then you role play the whole thing. Okay, role play the whole process to make sure we get it dialed in. Okay, and then just make your first sale, because all it takes makes your first high ticket sale, and you'll be excited, and there'll be never going back. Okay. So that is your introductory session and consultation system to be able to sell high ticket and also build recurring revenue at the same time. And even more importantly, be able to get your clients long-term transformational results because you've actually given them a recommendation that you can truly impact them and get the results they want. Okay? Talk to you soon.